Long before he became a global symbol of terror and wealth, Pablo Escobar was just a boy in Colombia. He did not start as a legend or a myth. He started as a child in a modest home. His world was small at first: hills, classrooms, and crowded buses into the city. This is where the story begins, long before cocaine, fame, and fear. Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria came into the world on December 1st, 1949, in a small town called Rio Negro, nestled in the Antioquia department of Colombia. His mother, Hermilda, was a strict but loving schoolteacher, deeply religious and determined to give her children a sense of dignity. His father, Abel de Jesus, worked the land as a humble farmer, sweating under the Colombian sun to feed a growing family. They had no luxuries, only prayers and hard work. But even as a child, Pablo's eyes didn't settle for the life around him. By the time he was 5, the Escobar family had moved to Medellín, a city pulsing with ambition and conflict. They settled in a poor neighborhood where houses were crammed into the hillsides and gunshots sometimes interrupted bedtime stories. Medellín wasn't yet the city of international headlines. But even then, it was a place where survival meant knowing how to navigate the streets. Pablo saw how money ruled everything: the school, the police, the food on your plate. And he hated being poor. As a young boy, Pablo wasn't interested in toys. He was fascinated by influence. While other kids played soccer, Pablo watched how men in sharp clothes got respect without ever breaking a sweat. He memorized the streets like a map. He observed how bribes worked, how threats were made without raising voices, how even teachers bowed to men who walked in with fat wallets. Poverty taught him something priceless. Money wasn't just power, it was immunity. Hermilda, his mother, hoped education would lift her son. She demanded he focus in class, that he read, write, and stay on the straight path. And Pablo did, to an extent. He was clever, but impatient. He did just enough to get by, never more. School didn't teach what he wanted to learn. He wanted shortcuts, he wanted access, and more than anything, he wanted out. His home life was tense. Abel, his father, was often away farming. Hermilda was the real backbone. She kept the household afloat, raising Pablo and his siblings with discipline. But Pablo was different. He was restless, hungry. As early as age 10, neighbors whispered he was too sharp for his age. Others said he was dangerous. He already knew how to lie with a straight face. At night, while his family prayed, Pablo would lie awake, staring at the ceiling. In his head, he counted pesos that didn't exist. He imagined houses with tiled floors, cars with tinted windows, and a mother who never had to ask anyone for anything. Rio Negro and Medellín may have been his roots, but his eyes were always somewhere far, far above. The transformation from a poor boy to a street hustler didn't happen overnight, but it started early. As a teenager, Pablo began finding ways to bring money into the house, not through chores or legal jobs, but through the streets. His first hustle? Contraband cigarettes. He'd buy them cheap, smuggled from Panama or Ecuador, then sell them at a markup to corner stores and shady street vendors. He was barely 14. It wasn't glamorous, but it was profitable. Pablo discovered he had a gift. He could sell anything. His voice was persuasive, his promises believable. More importantly, he was fearless. When rival sellers threatened him, he didn't flinch. When shop owners tried to cheat him, he came back with reinforcements. He understood the psychology of leverage long before he knew the word. From cigarettes, he moved to lottery tickets, then to petty scams, stolen electronics, knockoff perfumes, anything that could be flipped. If there was a loophole in the law or a blind eye to be turned, Pablo was there. And as he made money, he didn't save it, he invested it. Not in banks, but in reputation. He loaned small amounts to his peers. He gave to the neighborhood kids. He made sure people owed him favors. Then came one of his strangest hustles, stealing gravestones. Pablo and a friend would sneak into cemeteries, lift headstones, and sell them to crooked marble dealers. The dealers would scrub off the names and resell them as new. But Pablo wasn't thinking about the dead. He was thinking about the peso. By now, he was gaining a reputation. The kid from the barrio who always had money. The teenager who seemed older than his years. The one who always had a scheme. Even his mother, Hermilda, started turning a blind eye. She didn't know every detail, but she knew Pablo was providing, and in a poor home, that counted for a lot. At just 16, Pablo Escobar was no longer just another teen from Medellín. He was a small-time king in a land of survival, but this was just the beginning. He hadn't found his empire yet, but he was learning how to build one. The 1960s were a chaotic time in Colombia. The country was still reeling from La Violencia, a brutal civil war that had left more than 200,000 dead. Medellín, though slightly removed from the worst of the violence, was a city on edge. Political corruption was rampant, jobs were scarce, crime was rising. The city was split in two, the rich, who lived in gated communities and wore imported clothes, and the poor, who scrambled for coins on crowded buses. Escobar grew up on the poor side, where law enforcement was often absent or corrupt. The police could be bought, judges could be silenced, and in that vacuum, something new was growing, an underworld with its own rules. Young men formed street gangs not just for protection, but for power. They controlled neighborhoods, extorted businesses, and fought turf wars over drug corners and black market goods. In these gangs, respect was everything, and that respect often came at the end of a barrel. Pablo never formally joined a gang, but he was always connected, always watching, always learning. There was also the politics. Colombia was a country in flux. Leftist guerrilla groups were rising, and the government responded with heavy crackdowns. The state saw enemies everywhere, and for people like Pablo, this instability wasn't a threat, it was a blueprint. He saw how fear could be used, how chaos could open doors. Medellín was also expanding, new highways, new buildings. But corruption tainted it all. Government officials stole from public projects. Businessmen bribed their way to contracts. It was a world where doing things the legal way meant finishing last. Escobar understood this. He didn't want to play by the rules. He wanted to own the game. By the end of the 1960s, Pablo was approaching adulthood, but he wasn't interested in school. He wasn't looking for a boss. He wanted Medellín, not the city, but what it represented: power, money, and a name that carried weight. And the city was ready for someone bold enough to take it. Most kids dream of being doctors or athletes. Pablo Escobar made a different promise. According to those close to him, he once declared, "Voy a ser millonario antes de los 30. I will be a millionaire before I'm 30. It wasn't a hope, it was a mission. He didn't mean a comfortable life, he meant dominance. Escobar saw money as more than wealth. It was armor, it was permission, it was the ability to say no, to teachers, to cops, to anyone who tried to define him. And he hated being defined by poverty. That ambition burned in him like a furnace. In his late teens, Pablo started dressing sharper. He mimicked the local men who ran gambling rings and trucking schemes. He studied how they talked, how they smoked, how they walked into a room and commanded attention. He wasn't there yet, but he saw the path, and he was going to sprint down it. He once told a cousin, "If you want to be respected, you have to make people afraid of disrespecting you." That was his philosophy. Not charm, not popularity, power. He didn't seek approval, he sought leverage. Even as a teen, he carried himself like someone older, someone who already knew what he was becoming. He tried college briefly, studying political science, but it didn't last. The classroom was too slow. The streets were faster, more alive, more profitable. Escobar wasn't chasing titles or degrees. He was chasing empire, and he was running out of patience. Pablo didn't need a diploma to make history. He just needed the right opportunity, and in the shadows of Medellín, that opportunity was waiting. Cocaine wasn't yet the empire it would become, but the road was opening, and Escobar was already stepping forward. Before the planes, before the billions, there were just handshakes and favors. Escobar began building his network in the way most power figures do, quietly. He befriended truck drivers who moved goods across borders. He paid mechanics who could hide compartments inside vehicles. He got to know police officers who could be paid to look the other way. He formed relationships with small-time smugglers who dealt in electronics, alcohol, and cigarettes. These were Pablo's early mentors. They showed him the routes, the tricks, the language of the underworld. And Escobar didn't just learn, he improved. He organized better, planned deeper, negotiated harder. At the same time, he kept his image clean, at least publicly. He attended community events. He gave money to kids in his neighborhood. He built a reputation not just as a hustler, but as someone who looked out for his own. Loyalty was his currency, and he collected plenty. He also learned to test boundaries. He'd ship small amounts of goods just to see how authorities reacted. If they didn't, he'd scale up. If they did, he'd find a new route. Failure didn't scare him. Exposure did. So he moved in shadows, never staying in one place too long. Through it all, Pablo was watching. Who could be trusted? Who could be bought? Who would fold under pressure? He built a mental map of Medellín's power web, and slowly began to tug at the strings. These early years shaped everything that came after. Not cocaine, not planes, but people, connections, loyalty, bribery, intimidation. Pablo Escobar wasn't a legend yet, but the roots of a kingpin had already sunk deep into Colombian soil, and the world had no idea what was coming next. Pablo Escobar didn't invent cocaine, but he saw its potential long before most. In the early 1970s, while marijuana and heroin dominated the illegal drug scene, Escobar and a few others began paying attention to the growing curiosity around a white powder from the Andes. Cocaine was expensive, exotic, and in American high society, it was catching on fast. Escobar recognized not only its addictiveness, but its transportability. Odorless, compact, and easily hidden. The United States, especially cities like Miami, New York, and Los Angeles, became fertile markets. Demand was climbing, and very few were ready to supply it at scale. Colombia's geographical advantage added fuel to the fire. Situated near the coca-growing regions of Peru and Bolivia, and blessed with remote jungle airstrips and corruptible infrastructure, the country quickly became the hub of global cocaine production. The US government's crackdown on domestic narcotics ironically pushed American users to seek imported drugs, further boosting business for people like Escobar. To him, the math was simple. 1 kilo of cocaine made in Colombia cost roughly $1,000 to produce. But in Miami, it sold for up to $70,000. The profit margin was astronomical, and it didn't take long before this small-time smuggler turned into something much larger. Escobar moved quickly. He invested in labs hidden deep in the jungle, paying campesinos to process coca leaves into paste, and chemists to refine that paste into pure white powder. He learned the smuggling routes used by contraband traders and refined them. Instead of shipping in large, risky batches, he sent frequent, smaller shipments that were easier to hide and harder to trace. At first, he used tires, clothing, and even religious artifacts. Later, his methods would grow more sophisticated, but the real breakthrough was understanding just how much the Americans wanted this drug, and how little they understood what was coming. By 1976, Escobar had made his first million. He was just 26 years old. That same year, he was arrested with 39 kilos of cocaine in a hidden compartment of a car. But instead of seeing the inside of a prison cell, he bribed his way out. That arrest marked a turning point. He realized that brute force wasn't always necessary when corruption could do the work silently. The American demand for cocaine was turning into a full-on epidemic, and Escobar was poised to become its greatest supplier. The 1970s had opened the door. Pablo planned to kick it wide open. Escobar understood something many criminals failed to grasp. Alone, you build a business. With others, you build an empire. In the late 1970s, as his operations grew, he began forming strategic partnerships. His first major alliance came with the Ochoa family, three brothers from Medellín who had cattle wealth, international contacts, and a quiet ruthlessness. Jorge Luis, Fabio, and Juan David Ochoa shared Escobar's vision for scale. More importantly, they brought a sense of structure and discipline to what was becoming an unruly market. Then came Carlos Later, charismatic, eccentric, and dangerously ambitious. Later had been smuggling cars before discovering cocaine. His obsession with Nazi ideology and his love of attention made him volatile, but he was a logistical genius. Later proposed using Norman's Cay, a small island in the Bahamas, as a refueling stop for cocaine flights headed to Florida. Escobar agreed. This island would become the nerve center for one of the most powerful drug empires the world had ever seen. Escobar provided the product, Later the route, and the Ochoas the muscle and network. Together, they formed what would later be called the Medellín Cartel. It wasn't just a group of traffickers, it was a sophisticated, multinational operation with pilots, chemists, financiers, and killers. Each man had a role, and Pablo, though not always the loudest in the room, emerged as the gravitational force that held them all together. He wasn't flashy like Later or cautious like the Ochoas. He was bold, calculated, and willing to do what others wouldn't. Their first major success came in the form of coordination. Instead of competing, they unified their resources, pooled profits, and enforced internal discipline. Prices were set, routes protected, and shipments grew from hundreds of kilos to thousands. American authorities couldn't believe the scale. This was no longer street dealing, it was international narcotics logistics. By the end of the decade, the Medellín Cartel controlled most of the cocaine entering the United States. Pablo Escobar, at the heart of it all, had found his perfect circle. It wasn't a gang. It was a corporation, and business was booming. In the smuggling world, adaptation is survival. Pablo Escobar mastered the art. At first, he relied on simple methods, hiding packets of cocaine in shoes, tires, and fruit crates. But as border checks grew more aggressive, Escobar evolved. He began buying planes, not just any aircraft, but fleets of small, fast ones that could fly under radar. He hired ex-military pilots, mapped out jungle runways, and timed flights to avoid detection. Each flight carried hundreds of kilos, sometimes more, and landed in places like Norman's Cay before making the final jump into Florida. What set Escobar apart was innovation. When planes became too risky, he turned to the sea. Cocaine was packed into watertight containers and dropped off the coasts of Central America, where fishing boats would collect them. Later, he commissioned the creation of homemade submarines, crude but effective vessels that could glide just beneath the waterline, avoiding radar. These weren't just desperate attempts. They were calculated moves, backed by engineers and constant reinvestment into better tactics. Trucks, cargo ships, even private jets were used. Escobar bribed customs officials to look the other way. He printed false shipping manifests and disguised cocaine as everything from powdered milk to concrete mix. One of his most outrageous ideas involved hiding packets inside live animals. The cruelty of the method never stopped him. Profit was the only goal, and the US was addicted. At one point, it was estimated that Escobar smuggled 15 tons of cocaine into the US each day. The cartel made so much money, they struggled to store it. Warehouses were built just to hold stacks of cash, guarded like fortresses. Rubber bands alone cost them $2,500 a month. And rats, attracted to the smell of paper, ate through millions every year. Escobar reportedly wrote it off as spoilage. This smuggling network wasn't just about moving product. It was about scale, speed, and control. Every shipment reinforced their dominance. Every dollar fed their expansion. Pablo had created a global cocaine pipeline, and it was running at full capacity. Power invites challengers, and in Colombia's underworld, there was no shortage of them. But Pablo Escobar wasn't interested in sharing. As the Medellín Cartel rose, he turned his attention to consolidation. Smaller drug lords, local traffickers, and independent labs were either absorbed or eliminated. Diplomacy came first, bribery came second. But when neither worked, bullets did the job. One of the first major killings linked to Escobar involved Fabio Restrepo, a powerful trafficker in Medellín. Restrepo was respected, well-connected, and in Escobar's way. He disappeared without a trace. Days later, Escobar took over his routes, his contacts, and his territory. It wasn't just a killing, it was a hostile takeover. Others got the message: align or vanish. But Escobar didn't just kill for power, he killed for strategy. Journalists, police officers, judges, anyone who stood between him and absolute control became a target. He kept a mental list of enemies and used sicarios, or hitmen, to carry out the orders. Most were young, poor, and eager to earn money in a city with few options. For every kill, they were paid handsomely. These weren't secret murders. Escobar wanted the message clear. Bodies were dumped in public spaces, sometimes hung from bridges or left in cars. The police couldn't keep up. Witnesses were too scared to testify. And slowly, Medellín descended into a kind of quiet obedience. Fear ruled the streets. By the late 1970s, Pablo had built not just a business empire, but a culture of terror. The Medellín Cartel was not to be crossed. And Escobar, once a street hustler, had become judge, jury, and executioner in the world he ruled. While violence secured dominance, corruption made it sustainable. Pablo Escobar believed in the power of money, not just to earn, but to persuade. His motto, known throughout Colombia, was plata o plomo, silver or lead. Take the bribe or take the bullet. Most chose silver, and with every payment, his empire became more untouchable. Escobar started with local police. A monthly envelope ensured patrols looked the other way. Then he moved up. Customs officials, judges, prosecutors. In some cases, entire offices were bought out. Files vanished, raids were delayed, and warrants never materialized. Corruption was no longer hidden, it became systemic. Even in politics, Escobar found willing allies. Campaign donations bought loyalty. Public works funded by cartel money earned him public praise. He paved roads, built clinics, and paid off journalists. In return, they turned a blind eye. Colombia was becoming a narco-state, and few had the courage to speak out. He created fake companies to launder money and opened charity organizations to clean his image. Every transaction had a dual purpose: expand power and shield himself. Some saw him as a necessary evil, others as a benefactor. But Escobar knew the truth. As long as his money flowed, his empire would remain protected. When bribery failed, threats filled the gap. And when threats weren't enough, he returned to bullets. But most times, money spoke loudest. Colombia's institutions bent under the weight of Escobar's billions. He didn't just outsmart the system, he bought it. By the close of the 1970s, Pablo Escobar wasn't just a drug lord. He was a kingmaker, a shadow president, and the architect of a criminal empire so vast. It would take 2 decades and multiple governments to even begin dismantling it. By the mid-1980s, Pablo Escobar's operation supplied most of the cocaine that reached the United States and a large share of Europe, and buyers set their calendars by his schedules because he delivered. Shipments left Colombian labs and moved on air and sea routes that were tested, timed, and backed by alternates, so a single seizure could not wreck a month. Crews tracked weather, radar coverage, and patrol shifts like airline planners, then adjusted departures when a storm or new scanner appeared. Loads were split across planes, boats, and couriers, so the risk spread instead of piling up in one place. Buyers noticed that quality stayed steady from order to order, which is rare in any illegal market. That consistency turned a supplier into the default supplier. Planning, not luck, held the system together, and every team had a clean role that made the chain dependable. lab managers checked purity and weight twice before any brick left a door, because one sloppy count could echo across states. Route planners kept dry season and rainy season maps, plus holiday maps when patrols got strict or got lazy. Pilots logged fuel stops, runway lengths, and friendly ranch strips. Captains tracked tides, offshore handoffs, and lights for quiet night signals. Couriers learned handoff windows to the minute, so no crowd formed that would draw attention. A machine like that keeps moving even when a piece breaks. Price and reliability kept buyers close, and disputes were handled like business problems to fix, rather than fights to win. If a package arrived short, the next shipment corrected the count without drama, and the customer stayed on the list. If a driver ran late, the call brought a new time and a straight reason, not a story full of holes. Middlemen who paid on time got first pick during tight weeks, and those who played games quietly lost their slot. The rules were simple and steady, and the market learned them fast. In a risky trade, certainty becomes a service. Distribution reached far beyond Medellín, and each city along the chain had people who understood their box on the diagram. Miami brokers stored early loads and moved product into South Florida neighborhoods before sunrise, so traffic looked normal. New York and New Jersey warehouses took staggered drops that avoided patterns, then pushed bricks into borough networks with short, repeatable steps. Los Angeles crews worked out of quiet suburbs where garages and small businesses made good covers for quick meetings and clean exits. Cash moved the other way through couriers, exchange houses, and front companies that matched their stories to ledgers. One person owned each handoff, so blame never floated. Information acted like a shield, and small warnings mattered when you used them fast. Friendly eyes at ports and airports tipped the network when a new scanner arrived, when a supervisor changed, or when a unit added dogs to a shift. Concealment changed by the weekend. Names disappeared from paperwork the same day, and backup crews took over without a fuss. Codes kept radio talk short and hard to read, and pagers passed numbers instead of words, so nothing useful lived on a line. When a route heated up, the order paused, split, or moved, and no one argued the change. Staying invisible meant moving like you were inevitable and leaving almost nothing on paper. The name Medellín became a brand for steady supply, clear rules, and real penalties for games that risked the chain, and most people learned that lesson only once. Buyers knew prices would not swing without a reason, and answers would come fast when a clock mattered. Competitors copied methods but struggled to copy scale, because scale depends on trust as much as roads and planes. In those peak years, the market bent toward the group that kept promises during storms. Escobar's network kept those promises more often than anyone else. That is how dominance looks in practice. Money arrived faster than normal banks could handle, so cash lived in basements, walls, and rented rooms sealed behind fresh paint, because that was quicker than building vaults. Accountants wrapped stacks in plastic, counted by the block, and even logged losses from rats and humidity as ordinary business costs. Trucks shifted bills to new locations when old hiding places filled, and drivers swapped vehicles, so no pattern exposed a route. Some rooms held money from floor to ceiling, with aisles like a warehouse, so teams could find the right stack on a deadline. Security kept keys and combinations on short lists that were easy to change. The river of money never rested long enough to settle. Hacienda Nápoles showed the world what that cash could buy, and it looked like a private country with lakes, roads, and an airstrip cut into the green. The main house mixed comfort and display, with rooms for family and rooms for guests, whose decisions mattered. The private zoo held hippos, giraffes, and rare birds that most visitors had only seen in books or on television. Staff kept the grounds perfect, aircraft fueled, and kitchens ready for sudden parties that ran until daylight. Guests left with stories about cars arranged like a museum and animals that did not belong in Colombia. Those stories traveled faster than any press release. Aircraft and vehicles turned distance into a small problem, which made meetings easy to arrange on short notice because time was the rarest asset. Helicopters turned long drives into short hops over mountains, and small planes linked ranches, islands, and hidden strips without public flight plans. Riverboats and fast launches added quiet options when roads were busy or watched. Garages held rare cars in perfect rows for show and for silence, and mechanics kept them ready even when they sat for weeks. Tailors, jewelers, and chefs worked like part of the household staff, available when a call came late at night. Money reached every detail of daily life. The ranch also worked as a signal to partners that problems could be solved, people could be moved, and decisions could close without delay or risk. And that mattered more than luxury itself. Business visitors watched planes touch down, calls reach anyone, and agreements close in a single afternoon without a paper trail. Family gatherings softened the edges and reminded people that loyalty earned comfort and security that did not depend on a bank. Workers earned steady pay and told neighbors the boss kept his word, which is the strongest message in a place where promises are cheap. Photos from the estate spread through Medellín and beyond, shaping a picture of reach and calm. Each new image built the legend further. Spending reached into cities and small towns as apartments appeared under different names and companies, and hotels, clubs, and restaurants stretched rules to keep favored rooms open. Private spaces stayed ready even on sold-out nights, and managers learned to say yes first and solve details second. Suppliers enjoyed fast payment and repeated orders, which meant everyone had a reason to be helpful and quiet. Real estate soaked up bulk cash without the daily questions that follow a suitcase of bills, and ranch land offered cover for flights and storage that did not look like storage. The circle of comfort widened with every purchase. Money created a cushion that felt like armor. From the outside, the empire looked permanent because planes kept lifting, gates kept opening, and music kept playing, while security stayed close but polite, so nothing looked like a siege. Staff ran schedules like a watch with many gears, and the gears clicked on time. Wealth bought distance from problems and bought minutes to think when problems appeared, which is often enough for a leader. For a stretch, that distance created the sense that nothing could break the rhythm. The illusion was powerful because the machine worked so well. At the peak, even insiders started to think the peak could last. Escobar used generosity as a shield in the neighborhoods the city had ignored, and he funded housing blocks that moved families out of shacks into small concrete homes with real doors and steady power. Community leaders got help for water lines, drainage, and paved steps up steep hills that parents and grandparents climbed every day. Streetlights replaced dark corners where trouble gathered, and small parks turned empty lots into safe places for children. The improvements were simple, visible, and hard to forget. In places where official help felt slow or missing, this kind of help felt personal. Personal help changes how people talk. Medical costs can break a family, so he covered bills when parents fell short and stepped in when emergencies pushed budgets over the edge, which built quiet loyalty that lasts. Coffins were paid for when a death arrived with no savings, and that gesture carries weight in tight communities. Food baskets reached doorsteps after floods, fires, or layoffs, and volunteers passed them house to house so faces matched the gift. School supplies appeared in classrooms that had none, and teachers told parents who made it happen because someone always asks. Small clinics received equipment that made routine care quicker and safer. The list of favors grew without announcements. Sports gave him a daily bridge into young lives, and he funded uniforms, balls, and bus rides so teams could play with pride on weekends. Youth leagues kept kids busy after school, and coaches gained a reason to guide children who might otherwise drift toward trouble. Night games under new lights felt like festivals that pulled whole blocks together, and the sound of a crowd can reset how a neighborhood feels about itself. Older players mentored younger ones because a real field gives structure and status. Pride rose wherever money landed in practical ways. Pride turns into memory. He also paid for public fixes that city crews missed, and those small changes improve daily life in ways that matter even if they never make headlines. A solid roof on a community center kept classes dry through rainy season, which keeps a program alive. A paved staircase turned a risky climb into a simple walk, and that matters to a mother with a stroller or a grandparent with groceries. Better lighting let street markets stay open later with less theft and fewer fights, and vendors took home a little more each week. These jobs did not carry seals or press conferences. They carried names and faces that neighbors recognized. Gratitude becomes protection when trouble shows up, because people do not call police on the person who paid their bills and paved their steps. They do not answer questions in ways that create problems for someone they see as a helper. Strangers get told to leave and mind their business, and visitors learn not to push. Warnings travel fast when a patrol parks on the next block, or an unfamiliar car circles twice. In that kind of place, the street bends in your favor. He made sure it did. Neighbors repeated one line that worked like a shield. He helped us when others wouldn't, and that sentence closed doors gently but firmly. It let families feel proud of what they received because it was presented as support for the community, not charity with strings. It helped people defend their choice to stay quiet without arguing politics or crime. It kept attention on new roofs, lights, and fields, rather than on back rooms and ledgers. In those hillside streets, loyalty felt like a local law. A local law can be stronger than the written one. At his peak, Escobar managed his image like another business line, and every appearance served a purpose, even when it looked casual. Photos showed him smiling with family, friends, and well-known athletes, which softened what people imagined when they heard his name on the news. Community events placed him at the center of crowds because he funded what those crowds used every week. Security stood back, so the frame showed him as approachable and calm, not guarded and distant. The goal was simple: let people see a neighbor rather than a shadow. That picture is easier to defend in everyday talk. Soccer gave him reach without speeches because the sport touches every block, and support can move quietly through clubs and youth programs. Stadium scenes offered visibility that felt normal because fans do not question where uniforms come from when the team is winning. Victories create a glow that brushes anyone linked to the club, and that glow rides home in barbershop talk and family dinners. Backers who stay off the microphone still earn credit in living rooms and corner stores. Sports wrap influence in joy and routine that do not feel forced. Joy is hard to argue with. Local media sometimes found open doors and friendly tone, and short interviews let him present a family man who cared about neighborhoods more than headlines. Answers about community work played well. Questions about business drew brief, vague replies that closed the topic without heat. A soft laugh or a shift to another subject ended a hard line in a way that did not look defensive. He did not need long statements because the images did most of the work. Viewers remembered the feeling more than the details. Feelings often outlast facts in daily talk. Public outings were planned to look unplanned, so markets, festivals, and neighborhood gatherings felt like natural places for a handshake and a quick photo. Vendors waved, kids asked for pictures, and elders offered blessings, which made scenes that looked ordinary but carried a strong message. Security stayed close but out of frame, ready to act while the crowd stayed relaxed. The rhythm suggested he belonged in those spaces, and those spaces belonged to him. Belonging is a powerful message in any city. It lowers defenses before a word is spoken. Stories that clashed with the picture were handled quietly, because noise draws attention an operation does not want. A rumor got buried under a better story that arrived sooner and spread faster. A loud critic received a private visit from friends of friends who prefer to talk to a headline. A rough photo found a new home outside the newsroom, and editors learned to reach for other images. Not every fire needs water when you can stop sparks. Keeping the picture steady was the goal. Public image paid off in real safety because people who like a man are slower to believe the worst headline and quicker to offer the benefit of the doubt. Crowds gave cover when cars needed to pass or stop on short notice. And a friendly wave can slow a patrol better than a barrier. Officers looked like outsiders on blocks where he looked like a sponsor, and that changes how a scene unfolds. Warmth worked better than fear in many places where fear was common already. In those years, image was not decoration, it was a tool. The tool worked often. As the legend grew, neighborhoods acted like early warning systems that used people rather than gadgets, because people fit in. Kids on corners learned to spot unfamiliar plates and odd parking habits, then passed signals with a nod or a hand to a cap. Shopkeepers stalled strangers with long, polite questions while someone made a call. Women at windows watched intersections while they cooked or folded laundry, and they knew what normal looked like on their block. Street musicians shifted a song or changed tempo to mark who had arrived. The city became a net without showing its threads. Lookouts did not need radios to help, because a knock on one door leads to knocks on 5 more, and a call to a cousin reaches 10 people by the time it ends. A delivery that used to take 5 minutes stretched to 15 if someone needed time to move. Delays stacked until a patrol reached a place that no longer mattered. No flag went up and no whistle blew. Neighbors just moved the way neighbors move. The effect was quiet and strong. Quiet can be the best cover. Safe houses hid inside shops and small homes that matched the block, and the design focused on exits over furniture. A barbershop's back door opened into a narrow alley with 2 choices, so a turn hid the next turn. A bakery oven door covered a crawl space into the next building, so a short move became a long search. A modest garage held a motorcycle under a false floor for a quick break from a dead end. Rooms carried small changes that mattered when seconds mattered. From the sidewalk, nothing looked special. Inside, everything was planned. Movement wore routine because routine is invisible on a busy day, and ordinary life can hide several steps if those steps are short. A family visit to an aunt looked like any weekend drive, even if the route shifted twice for reasons no one outside could see. A flower delivery masked a backroom meeting because deliveries happen all day and no one asks. A pickup game at a field covered a handoff at the edge because kids and soccer are everywhere and noise helps. A church service gave an hour of calm while routes were checked and calls were made. Ordinary scenes hold the most space. Stories traveled faster than facts and made stronger shields, and those stories painted a man who tipped well, remembered names, and walked markets without guards. People told tales of favors that paid for surgeries, saved homes, or brought groceries to a door after a fire. Each tale added another layer to a picture that felt more real than a bulletin or a press note. Neighbors repeated what matched what they had seen on their own block. Over time, the picture stood on its own. A picture like that blocks questions before they form. When officers finally closed in, hillside streets turned into a maze that locals knew by heart, and the maze obeyed the people who lived there. Alleys narrowed into chutes that cut between houses and forced quick choices that only locals got right on the first try. Stairs split into paths that met again 3 levels below, and a wrong turn cost a minute that mattered. A single door opened into a stairwell with 2 more doors at the top, and a 3rd exit waded through a kitchen no one thought to check. The clock ruled those moments, and the neighborhood owned the clock. In that maze, the myth did not just protect him, it moved him. Pablo Escobar did not step into politics to give speeches. He stepped in to gain protection and status that money alone could not buy. In 1982, he entered national politics through the Liberal Party and secured a seat as an alternate representative, a role that still put him inside the halls of power. He toured neighborhoods promising housing, clinics, and soccer fields, and those promises landed because people had already seen him fund projects with his own cash. Cameras showed a smiling community donor more than a trafficker, and many voters liked what they saw. The image worked because daily needs were real, and he met them fast. Politics offered a clean suit for a man building a very different kind of empire. Inside Congress, he talked about poverty, roads, and dignity for working families. Keeping the topics simple and close to daily life, he appeared with local leaders who praised his quick funding and easy access to resources. That visibility built ties to mayors, councilors, and contractors who could open doors when shipments and money needed safe passage. He learned committee calendars, staff names, and the unspoken rules that move paper faster. The message he pushed in interviews focused on public service and opportunity rather than the trade fueling his rise. For a moment, the strategy blurred two worlds. The title, Representative, changed how some officials treated him, and that mattered when phones rang late. Police commanders took calls, customs officers accepted meetings, and clerks moved files to the top of the pile. Visits to ministries felt like business, not favors in a back room, and the badge of office turned questions into courtesies. He was careful with tone, speaking softly, paying on time, and avoiding scenes. Politics gave him a stage and a shield. The shield made Roots feel safer. He also embraced public charity that looked official, even when it wasn't. Housing blocks rose on the hillsides, uniforms turned up at youth clubs, and small clinics got equipment stamped with municipal logos. People linked the progress to the man they saw on television, not to paperwork filed in distant offices. He made sure gratitude attached to his name before it attached to any party. In neighborhoods that felt ignored, that approach built loyalty quickly. Loyalty, in turn, protected movement. At the same time, national debate heated around extradition to the United States, a policy traffickers feared more than any local sentence. Escobar framed himself as a defender of Colombian sovereignty, arguing that Colombians should face Colombian courts. The line played well in some circles, because pride and law are powerful themes. It also served his private need to block a threat he could not bribe. Politics gave him a microphone to repeat that message often. The message found an audience. But visibility cut both ways, and reporters began to press harder on the gap between speeches and street stories. Photos of private jets, warehouses, and odd company mixed with campaign images that looked too clean. A few prosecutors and a growing number of journalists decided to test the public story against hard evidence. The questions reached cabinet level, and the tone in the Capitol shifted. The seat that once looked like a shield started to look like a target. The next chapter of his public life came fast. In 1983, President Betancourt appointed Rodrigo Lara Bonilla as Minister of Justice, and Lara made one promise in private and in public. The state would confront the drug trade. He spoke clearly about money-corrupting politics and vowed to protect judges who took on the biggest cases. He demanded better funding for investigations and stronger ties with international partners. From the first week, he asked for files that mentioned traffickers by name. Those files soon included Pablo Escobar. The collision course was set. Investigators linked planes, warehouses, and cash fronts to trafficking networks that supplied U.S. cities. Bank trails pointed to shell companies that matched people seen with Escobar on the ground. Seized documents and testimonies began to line up with what journalists had been writing. Lara pushed for evidence that would hold in court and on the floor of Congress. He wanted facts that could not be brushed off as rumor. When those facts stacked high enough, he took them public. On the national stage, Lara called out traffickers by name and labeled them a direct threat to Colombia's institutions. He urged Congress to stop pretending charity erased crime and demanded that public officials cut ties to anyone under serious investigation. The spotlight swung to Escobar's seat and to the men who vouched for him. Pressure from the presidency and from party leaders made that seat impossible to defend. In short order, Escobar lost the congressional post that had given him cover. The break was sudden and clear. Lara also revived the push for extradition to the United States, arguing that certain cases could not be safely tried at home. U.S. officials welcomed the stance and signaled stronger cooperation on seizures, prosecutions, and money trails. The message to traffickers was blunt. If Colombia could not jail you here, it would send you north. In interviews and street talk, a phrase began to circle around Escobar's world. Better a grave in Colombia than a jail in the United States. That line captured the depth of the threat he felt. The stakes were now personal. On April 30th, 1984, motorcycle gunmen murdered Rodrigo Lara Bonilla in Bogota, and the country froze in shock. Families watched the news in silence as images of the bullet-riddled car filled screens. Crowds gathered in grief and anger, and leaders called the act an attack on the nation, not just on a man. The presidency declared a state of siege and ordered an immediate crackdown. The murder forced neutral voices to choose a side. The war moved from talk to action. In the wave that followed, the government raided properties, seized planes, and detained dozens of people tied to the major networks. Extraditions restarted with force, and judges received security details because threats were now expected, not exceptional. Escobar's attempt to live between two identities, public benefactor and hidden boss, collapsed under the new reality. In the eyes of the state, he was no longer a politician who helped the poor. He was the enemy who killed a minister. The conflict entered open season. After Lara's death, targeted killings multiplied, and the pattern carried a clear message. Anyone who pushed cases forward could be marked. Judges who signed warrants, prosecutors who filed charges, and police commanders who led raids found their names on lists. Some were ambushed near their homes. Others were attacked on routes they drove every day. Funeral processions blended with courtroom calendars. Families learned to change routines or to live under guard. The line between work and danger disappeared. Journalists who exposed roots, front companies, and political ties faced the same pressure. In 1986, Guillermo Cano, the editor of El Espectador, was shot outside the newspaper offices after years of reporting on the cartel. His murder shook the press across the country, and many newsrooms tightened their own rules for security. Younger reporters hid bylines, and editors debated how to keep telling the truth without painting targets on their teams. Some continued, some stepped back, and some left the beat. Fear pressed on the page before ink did. Legal attacks grew more sophisticated as well, with threats against witnesses and quiet offers to defense attorneys who might drag cases into procedural dead ends. Court timetables stretched as defendants changed lawyers, filed challenges, and forced new hearings. Meanwhile, intimidation of clerks, bailiffs, and drivers chipped away at the system's daily function. A courthouse can feel strong from the outside and brittle from the inside when pressure lands in small, constant ways. The goal was not one big victory. The goal was fatigue. High-profile political figures also came under direct fire as the 1989 election season approached. On August 18, 1989, presidential candidate Luis Carlos Galán was assassinated at a rally near Bogota after calling for a hard line against traffickers. The killing stunned the country and galvanized the government to intensify joint operations with U.S. agencies. Campaigns shifted to security first and policy second. Citizens who once watched the fight at a distance now felt it at the center of civic life. The cost of speaking openly had become deadly. Regional officials and police leaders in Antioquia and beyond were gunned down to weaken local resistance. Commanders known for aggressive raids were tracked and attacked at traffic lights, outside homes, and in restaurants. Uniforms that once signaled authority now drew sniper scopes and ambushes. Stations hardened perimeters, while patrols shortened time on predictable routes. Training included not just tactics, but survival between shifts. The stress level across the ranks rose with each funeral. This was the era when people learned the practical meaning of the phrase plata o plomo, silver or lead. If a bribe failed, a bullet followed, and institutions bled authority every time a threat worked. Some officials held the line. Others bent or disappeared from their posts. The map of who could be trusted shifted week to week. Under that pressure, the state began preparing responses that reached beyond arrests. The next stage would abandon caution. The conflict turned from targeted killings to mass casualty terror meant to force political results. Car bombs hit commercial districts, police stations, and newspaper offices, aiming to shake public confidence and wear down the will to fight. The message was brutal and simple. If you press us, everyone suffers. Families changed how they shopped, commuted, and met friends because crowded places no longer felt safe. Sirens became a daily soundtrack. The city learned to scan the street before stepping out. On November 6th to 7th, 1985, the M-19 guerrilla group stormed the Palace of Justice in Bogota and took hostages, and the siege ended with a national tragedy as the building burned and many died. Multiple investigators and later accounts allege that cartel money helped fuel the operation to destroy extradition files, though direct proof remained contested and complex. What millions saw was the seat of justice under attack and the state fighting room by room to regain control. The event scarred the country's memory and raised hard questions about how enemies of extradition aligned. In living rooms and offices, people asked if the conflict had limits. The answer felt uncertain. As the decade moved on, bombs targeted civic life as much as official sites, spreading fear where people gathered for work and for joy. Shopping centers, parking lots, and transit hubs absorbed blasts that made headlines and left neighborhoods on edge for weeks. Emergency crews drilled for scenes no one wanted to imagine, and hospitals prepared for surges on days that began quiet. Detectives mapped fragments to find patterns, while citizens learned to report anything that looked out of place. Normal routines broke into shorter, guarded steps. That is how terror works. On November 27, 1989, Avianca Flight 203 exploded after takeoff from Bogota, killing everyone on board and several people on the ground. Investigators concluded the device was placed to kill a presidential candidate expected to be on the flight, an attack that pushed national grief into international outrage. Families waited for news that could not bring anyone back. Airports tightened security and rechecked every procedure they could change quickly. The idea that a civilian airliner could be used to send a political message stunned even people hardened by years of violence. Lines that once seemed firm were gone. That same year, a powerful car bomb hit the National Intelligence Agency headquarters in downtown Bogota, killing and injuring scores and scattering debris across city blocks. Office workers ran through smoke while rescuers clawed through concrete to find survivors. The blast damaged buildings, livelihoods, and a sense of what the center of a capital should feel like. The attack showed that no symbol was too large to strike. It also showed how fast a city can rally. People lined up to give blood before the dust settled. These acts of terror were aimed at forcing the government to abandon extradition and to negotiate from fear. But the strategy carried a cost. Public anger deepened, international partners tightened cooperation, and lawmakers who once hesitated now pushed for tougher tools. The state began to innovate in response, building units, laws, and alliances shaped for a long fight. The conflict was no longer a series of raids and trials. It had become a war to decide who governed the country's future. In Medellín, daily life changed in ways that touched every family. Whether they supported the cartel, opposed it, or tried to stay invisible, parents planned commutes around checkpoints and rumor, and shop owners moved opening hours to dodge risks they could not see. School schedules bent to the sound of sirens and to the quiet that follows a blast. Public buses ran with half their seats empty on bad weeks. People scanned faces on sidewalks as if faces were weather. Home felt safer until it didn't. Bounties on police officers turned certain corners into hunting grounds, a tactic that hit both morale and manpower. Young hitmen from poor neighborhoods were paid fixed fees to target patrolmen and investigators, and the offer pulled in teenagers who saw no other cash path. Funerals crowded church calendars, and stations posted memorials that grew month by month. Officers changed routines, routes, and even uniforms when possible, but predictability is hard to erase. The badge became a target in a way the country had never seen. Families of officers lived with a fear that did not clock out. Police formed specialized units and joined military teams in joint operations designed for urban war rather than normal policing. The search block in Medellín trained to move fast through tight streets, to hit safe houses, and to disrupt payments as much as product. Commanders rotated personnel to keep enemies guessing and to reduce the risk of corruption taking root. Intelligence cells mapped the web of drivers, lookouts, and accountants who kept money flowing. Raids became more frequent and more precise. The goal was to make the network spend time on defense. Neighborhoods that had once praised Escobar's gifts now felt pulled between gratitude and fear as explosions and gunfights scarred familiar blocks. Some residents stayed loyal because the housing and lights were still real. Others turned away because the cost had grown too high. Informal warning systems, kids on corners, shopkeepers at doors, women at windows, kept working, but not always for the same side. A street can love a man who built its roofs and hate the bombs that shake those roofs loose. Mixed feelings filled the air like a fog you cannot sweep. Survival, not ideals, set most choices. The economy of the city carried new scars as businesses raised insurance, moved to cash only, or shut doors after repeated threats. Truckers skipped certain routes, delivery schedules shortened, and warehouses hired guards who watched more than they loaded. Nightlife rose and fell with rumor, and restaurants learned to serve fast and close early. The city's rhythm lost its steady beat. Every plan included a backup plan, even for birthday parties and weddings. That constant strain wears on people more than headlines can show. By 1990 and 1991, Medellín looked and sounded like a city living inside a conflict with no clear end. And the pressure pushed both sides to try new moves. The cartel needed space and leverage. The state needed a way to stop the bomb calendar from running the news. Talks about surrender terms appeared in the press, and rumors about a special prison began to surface. Residents wondered if any deal could turn the noise down. The war had reached a point where every step carried risk. The next phase would test how far both sides were willing to go. Colombia was exhausted. Bombs, assassinations, and fear had turned daily life into a gamble, and leaders were desperate for a way to lower the noise. Pablo Escobar offered a deal. He would surrender if Colombia kept him in a Colombian prison and not send him to the United States. The new constitution, passed that year, paused extradition and made his offer look possible. Talks moved in private rooms with tight circles, careful wording, and quiet guarantees. In June 1991, Escobar walked into custody and told the country the war could end if the terms were respected. The prison he chose was a hilltop facility near Envigado that the world would soon know as La Catedral. He paid for the site, helped design its layout, and selected many of the guards who would watch him. The government framed it as a necessary step to stop the bloodshed and bring a powerful man under control. Families wanted the bomb calendar to stop, and for a moment, the city breathed easier. From a distance, it looked like the violence for peace trade had worked. Up close, La Catedral was something else entirely. La Catedral had cell blocks, but it also had views, a bar, a soccer field, and rooms set aside for long visits with friends and business contacts. Trucks arrived with supplies that did not look like prison rations, and weekend parties rolled late behind high walls and armed gates. Escobar kept phones and couriers moving, and the cartel's money lines kept humming as if nothing had changed. He mediated disputes, set prices, and approved punishments from a balcony that looked over the valley. Prison was a word. Control was the reality. The city below could feel it. Tension grew when profits and loyalties inside the organization began to shift. Two trusted lieutenants, Fernando Galeano and Gerardo Moncada, were accused of skimming and betrayal during Escobar's confinement. In 1992, both men were killed after being summoned to La Catedral, a decision that sent a shock through Medellín's criminal world and the national government. The murders showed that the inmate still ran everything that mattered and would enforce order even behind bars. For the Colombian state, that crossed a line that could not be ignored. Action had to come next. After the killings, the presidency ordered Escobar moved to a real military prison with real control. The plan called for a surprise transfer, a tighter perimeter, and a guard force he could not influence. On the chosen day in July 1992, teams climbed the hill to take him out, only to find that La Catedral had blind spots, secret routes, and doors that stalled just long enough. While officials argued over jurisdiction and timing, Escobar slipped through a service exit carved into the fog. By the time orders aligned, the target was gone. The city understood the message immediately. The escape humiliated the government and reset the conflict overnight. A man they had claimed to control had walked back into the hills above his hometown. The search restarted with urgency, this time with more technology, more coordination, and fewer illusions. Safe houses were mapped and raided, stash sites were burned, and bank fronts took harder hits. Medellín braced for another cycle of raids and gunfights. The truce had ended. The hunt was back. With Escobar free, enemies he had made over the years moved to finish him. A shadowy group calling itself Los Pepes, people persecuted by Pablo Escobar, began attacking his allies, burning properties, and leaking information. Many believed rival traffickers supported the group, and that some members had quiet ties to people inside law enforcement. Whether or not every rumor was true, the pressure worked. Lieutenants defected, money men ran, and safe houses turned unsafe. Fear spread inside his own ranks. The circle around him shrank week by week. At the same time, the Colombian search bloc rebuilt its net with US help on signals and surveillance. Radio direction finders, phone intercepts, and teams trained to move fast in tight streets changed the odds. Escobar switched houses, swapped cars, and cut calls short, but family ties kept pulling him back to familiar numbers. Each call to a son, wife, or mother became a risk the police tried to time and triangulate. Raids landed closer. The pattern of his movements started to show. Money once bought silence. Now it could not buy rest. Couriers feared Los Pepes, drivers feared checkpoints, and accountants feared what a seized ledger might reveal. Former allies used the chaos to settle scores or trade tips for safety. Colombia, the United States, and local rivals were pushing from three sides at once. The man who once dictated rules now reacted to them. Every day on the run cost more than the last. And December 2nd, 1993, one day after his 44th birthday, Escobar made a call from a modest house in Medellín's Los Olivos neighborhood. The search bloc was already tracking the signal and closed in with a small team. He and his bodyguard tried to flee across the red tile roofs, jumping gaps and searching for a stairwell that would lead to the street. Shots cracked in the open air as officers climbed after them. Minutes later, both men lay dead on the tiles. The chase that had defined an era ended above an ordinary block. Photographs from the scene moved around the world within hours. Some argued over the final shot, but the official version credited the Colombian police with the kill during the running gunfight. For many in Medellín, the feeling was complicated. Relief that the hunt was over, sorrow for years of loss, and fear of what the next power might try. The city had been living inside someone else's story. Now, it had to write a new one. The government declared a turning point. International partners called it a lesson bought at a terrible price. With Escobar gone, the Medellín Cartel fractured and faded, replaced in time by rivals who chose quieter methods and slower wars. The mass bombings and open terror that marked his peak lost their center of gravity. Extradition returned, specialized police units matured, and courts adapted to long, complex cases. None of that erased what had happened, but it changed the path forward. The country could begin to heal in public. Healing would take years. His death did not end crime or solve poverty, but it ended a chapter where one man bent a nation's schedule around his phone calls. La Catedral became a cautionary tale about deals that trade silence for control. The escape warned what happens when a state underestimates a prisoner who still commands loyalty. And the rooftop in Los Olivos became a symbol, the place where a story built on fear finally ran out of space.